to Dunder Data Python Challenge number 3. These are daily exercises to challenge your Python skills. You can take all of the challenges at python.dunderdata.com. So in this challenge, you are given any number of lists of integers, and your job is to return the list with the single largest value. So let's drop down here into the body of our function, delete the erase not implemented error, and then begin our code here. This is another challenge where you can solve it in a single line. It's very similar to challenge number 2. So we're going to use the max function and pass it in this tuple of lists. So if you recall, this star list variable collects all of the lists passed into the function as a tuple. So this doesn't work right here, max of lists. Python has its own rules for determining what does the max of a list of lists is. We have to use the key parameter to override these rules, and the key parameter will be must be set to a function that gets called on every single individual item in that list. So what we're going to do is pass it in the max function, the built-in max function again, and so it's going to take the maximum value of every list that it sees and then use that value to order all of the lists and then just return that list that has produced the maximum. So the answer is just that simple. It's very clever with Python. You do very cool things, using the built-in functions, and then with this setting this key parameter to specify a very specific kind of ordering that you want. Okay, so let's execute that cell, and then we can execute this with some sample input, and we can see that the second list is the one with the single maximum value, 9, 10, negative 20. You can, of course, add in as many lists as you want. So we can just put in some other list that has a higher number, say 100 and negative 99. We can make sure this is correct by putting in a list with a lower number. So it looks like it's working. The assert statement just double checks that it is actually true. If there's no error here, then you can be confident that your code works for at least this specific example. Let's go ahead and run that. So there's no error there, so everything looks good. All right, so that's the solution to Dunder Data Python Challenge number 3. Welcome to Dunder Data Python Challenge number 4. These are daily exercises to challenge your Python skills. You can take all of the challenges at python.dunderdata.com. So in this challenge, you are given any number of lists of numbers, and you are to find the maximum value in each list. Now, what is returned is these maximum values sorted from greatest to least in a list. So we need to find the maximum value of each list first. Let's go ahead and get started down here, and we can use a list comprehension. So let's create a new variable called maxvals, and we will just use a list comprehension here. So we'll iterate through each of the lists, and we'll use the letter L to represent them. So for L in lists, take the maximum L, and then let's just return this just so that we can see what we have. So we're going to answer part of this challenge. So this should give us the maximum of each of the lists. So here's some sample data that is passed into our function. We have 3 lists here, and it looks like 10, 20, and 17 are the max values, and that's what we get. But that's not the solution. We need to sort this list from greatest to least. And the way to do this is with the sorted function. So the sorted function will sort whatever you give it over here and return a list. Now there is a reverse parameter here to sort it in reverse order. And by default it is least to greatest. So reverse will sort it from greatest to least. So that should do it. And that is a perfectly valid solution. Now I want to show one other solution that is in a single line. So instead what we could do, so let me just comment this out for a second. What we could do is use the map function over here. And the way the map function works is that you will provide a function here to be applied to each one of the iterables. So the function we're going to apply here is the max. Our iterable is lists. So this will create that same sequence over here of just maximum values. So this is a little shortcut using the map function, but it does not return a list. Instead, You could wrap it in lists, but you can pass this directly to the sorted function like this, and then the sorted function will take this object, which basically just generates that sequence of maximum values when it's needed, so not necessarily when it's actually called. And so this will essentially represent the list of maximums, but it'll do it in a little less code. So we'll just put this right here, and then we can just execute this, and we should get the same exact solution. So that's another way of writing it. And then we can use the assert statement just to double check that it equals exactly what we see with our eyes, and we don't have any problem with it. So that's the solution to Dunder Data Python challenge number 4. Welcome to Dunder Data Python challenge number 5. These are daily exercises to challenge your Python skills. You can take the challenges at python.dunderdata.com. So in this challenge, given any number of lists of integers, return the maximum value at each position as a list. So we're going to assume that all lists are the same length here. Now this is a little bit more challenging problem. You can see that it's worth 2 points instead of 1. Any challenge that's worth more than 1 point is going to be a little bit more difficult. So let's go ahead and look at the sample input. It might be confusing to determine what exactly this exercise is telling you to return. So what I want to happen is that you see all of these lists, is to look at each position of each list one at a time, or together, excuse me. So we're going to look at the first position. So 5 is the value in the first position in the first list. 2 is the value for the first position in the second list, and then 4. So we have 5, 2, and 4. So I want to find the maximum of those 3 numbers, and that's going to be 5. Then for the second position, we have 10, 20, and 100. So the maximum value is 100. And then for the third position, we have 3, 7, and -9, and 7 is the max there. So what I want returned for this specific input is this list 5, 100, and 7. Let's go ahead and begin our solution. It's helpful to know about the zip function. So the zip function will take in a number of different iterables. So here we're going to pass in each one of our lists as a separate argument. And then you can think of it acting like a zipper, where each one of these lists is vertical. So think of 5, 10, and 3 vertical, 2, 20, and 7, 4, 100, and -9. And then it'll create this iterable object that goes through each one position at a time. So it'll go through all the first positions, all the second positions, and then all the third positions. So let's go ahead and see how the zip function works itself, and then we will answer the problem. The way the zip function works is that you pass it in any number of iterables. And in our case, the iterables are individual lists. So let's go ahead and write this. Now, our lists are stored in this lists variable, which is a tuple of lists of integers. So normally you start off the zip function and pass it in like list 1, comma list 2, comma list 3. All these lists are passed in as positional arguments, but there's a trick here that we can do since we're using an iterable itself to hold all of our lists, and that is to unpack it with the star notation. The zip function does not return a viewable object. It just sets up sequences that we can iterate through. So in order to view these sequences, we need to either iterate through them directly or pass it to some other function that knows how to handle these sequences. So here we're going to pass it to the list constructor, and we'll make a list out of all the sequences that the zip function produces. Let's go ahead and execute this cell, and then we can execute the function with this sample data to see what it produces. So it produces a single list of 3 item tuples. So the first tuple is simply the first positions of each list, 5, 2, and 4. The second tuple is just the second positions, 10, 20, and 100. And the third tuple is just the third positions, 3, 7, and -9. So for this function, or for this challenge, what we need to do is collect the maximum value of each one of these tuples. So we'll do that with a list comprehension. And since we will iterate through this, we don't need the list to expand it and make it viewable anymore. So we'll say max of the tuple that is going to be iterating for t in the zip function like this. So we're going to iterate through this every tuple that the zip function creates, and then find the maximum value and then return that as a list. So let's go ahead and execute this, and then we can execute with our sample input, and we see that we do in fact get the correct solution. There's a slightly different solution that doesn't involve a for loop. We can instead, let's just go ahead and comment this out. Instead, what we could do here is use the map function to map the max function to each one of these iterables that the zip function creates, like this. So this will just go through each one of those tuples and apply the max function to it. Now, the map function, again, is something that is not viewable. We have to either iterate through it to produce the results, or we can pass it to a function like list to view the items in it as a list. So let's go ahead and do that. And so there is the alternative solution without any a direct iteration using a for loop. So both essentially do the exact same thing. And then we can just call this cell right here to use the assert statement to determine that whether or not we have this exactly correct over here. All right, so that does it for Dunder Data Python Challenge number 5. Welcome to Dunder Data Python Challenge number 6. These are daily exercises to challenge your Python skills. Take all the challenges at python.dunderdata.com. So in this challenge, given any number of list of integers, return the product of the largest values in each list without using any arithmetic operators and without using a for loop. So here's a hint that will help us out. So we have to go through each one of the lists that were given, find the largest value, and then multiply all those values together and return that number. So you might be wondering how this is possible without using a for loop and without using the operators, like the arithmetic operators, such as the multiplication operator. Well, it's possible because the standard library has functions that will do all of the tasks that we need. So let's drop down in here and delete the raise not implemented error. And before we use any of this standard library, let's make sure that we can get the maximum value from each list. So if you take a look at some of the sample input, what we want to do is get the maximum value of each list down here first. That's what we need to do first. Let's just use a return statement. We'll use the map function because we can't use a for loop, and we will take the maximum of each one of these lists. So this is how this is done. This map function will apply the max function to each one of these lists, and we need to return it. We can return it as a list so we can actually view the object like that. So let's just go ahead and test our code right now to see if it's correctly pulled out the maximum, and it looks like it has. So now what we're going to do is we need to figure out a way to multiply two numbers together without using the multiplication operator. And the way this is possible, there's a function in the operator library called mul. So you just pass it two numbers, so it'll be like 3, 4, 3, 5, multiply 3, 5, and this will return as 15. So that's how it works. But what we also need to do is somehow iterate through each one of these and keep multiplying the result by the next maximum value that it finds. So interestingly enough, there is a function in the functools library called reduce, which is able to do this. So reduce takes in, we don't need the list anymore. So what we'll do is reduce will go through an iterable. So our iterable right here will just be the maximum values. So it's iterating through these maximums one at a time, and it will multiply whatever the current value is times the very next value. So it'll just use the first value as the current value, and then it'll just keep multiplying from there. So that is how we can do this without using any arithmetic operators and without using a for loop. So it's with the help of the standard library. Let's go ahead and see the result here. So it looks like it's worked correctly. 5 times 10 times 7 is 350. We can double check with the search statement right there. Okay, so that does it for Dunder Data Python Challenge number 6. Welcome to Dunder Data Python Challenge number 7. These are daily exercises to challenge your Python skills. You can take all of the challenges at python.dunderdata.com. So in this challenge, given any number of lists of integers, return a single list of all elements sorted from least to greatest. So we're going to be given a bunch of lists. We need to put all the elements in a single list and then sort them from least to greatest. So I'm just going to show a single solution here. The first idea is just to concatenate all the lists together, and there's a number of ways of doing that, but I'm just going to show you one. I'll say the final list will just be an empty list. So we'll start out with some empty list, and then we're going to use the extend method of lists to just keep extending them by all of the elements of each individual list. So we will use a for loop here. So we'll just say for L in list. So it's going to iterate through each one of those lists, and we'll say final list dot extend, and we'll pass it in this. So these are individual lists. So if we look at our some sample data over here, we have 3 lists over here. This will just keep extending this final list by each one of these, all the elements of the inner lists. So let's go ahead and return this final list at this point, just so we can look at it. So here we go. So it has successfully concatenated them. Then the last thing we're going to do is just sort this, and we'll just use the sorted function, and by default it sorts from least to greatest. So this should give us the answer. We could check with the assert statement down below, and it appears that it is verified correctly. So this is just one solution on doing this, but I believe it is a fairly clear one and a pretty fast one as well. Okay, so that does it for Dunder Data Python Challenge number 7. Welcome to Dunder Data Python Challenge number 8. These are daily exercises to challenge your Python skills. Take all of the challenges at python.dunderdata.com. So in this challenge, you are given a list of integers, and you need to total the even integers and odd integers separately, and then return the absolute difference between those two totals. So this sounds pretty simple. So let's take a look actually at some sample input. We need to find all the odd integers, and in this case they come first, 1, 3, 5, and 9, so that totals to 18. The even integers total to 22, and the difference between them is 4. The absolute difference between them is 4, and that's what we need to return. All right, so let's get started here. We can have 2 variables here. We'll create odd, even total, and odd total. So that'll be our starting totals. And then we'll just iterate through each number. So we'll say for num in a list. So we're given a single list. And so we need to determine if it's even or odd. So if num divided by 2, this is the remainder actually, so modulus 2, if num modulus 2, so if that equals 0, then we have an even integer, and then we'll increase the even total, say plus equals whatever that number is. Otherwise, we will increase the odd total like that, and then we just need to return the absolute value between the even total and the odd total. So that should do it. So we've executed that cell, we've inputted the function. Let's see the result of some sample output. So that looks good. And then the assert statement should also turn out fine. So everything looks good here. We've just initiated some even and odd totals. We've determined whether or not the value in each list is even or odd, and then just add that number to that total, and then just do the abs built-in function to make sure that we get a positive value of the difference between the even and the odd total. Okay, so that does it for Dunder Data Python Challenge number 8.